Welcome to Ewnet Podcast episode 4. Today we'll be dealing with amplifying women's researchers' voices. I'm here with Dr. Mercy Fekado, Associate Professor at the Institute of Peace and Security Studies, and we'll be discussing about her new book, which came out in 2024. And I'm very glad to have you here, Dr. Mercy, and discussion that we'll be having about your book. Before we dive into the discussing about the book and its findings, I would like you to tell us and the viewers, who is Mercy, how did she get to research work, and your earlier paths into research, and we'll take it from there. And thank you again for coming and joining us here.
Okay, I thank you for inviting me. And I really appreciate what you're doing through Ewnet. So thank you, Nazant, for inviting me to this podcast.
You're welcome.
Okay, so how did my journey as a researcher start? Okay, so I think like most people in academia, my journey as an academic researcher started in Addis Ababa University, in a university, which is the university that I currently am now employed in. So I studied there for several years as an undergraduate and graduate student, and my journey there as a researcher started by conducting research to fulfill requirements, in the programs that I was enrolled in. That is the beginning.
Okay. Could you also tell us a little bit about your research thematics? I mean, how it evolves, which type of areas you've covered so far before the book, and then we'll also discuss about why the book. You can answer both. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have studied political science as an undergraduate student, and peace and security and global studies. So my research area has been varied. I have covered different things at different times. My curiosity has evolved. I have studied issues of secession, small arms circulation, disarmament, large-scale government investments, in peripheries, things like that. This particular research theme on parliaments came about as, it's a natural curiosity as someone that's interested in politics, that's interested in decision-making. I think it's natural to ask questions about the parliament. It is one of the objects, one of the institutions of curiosity. So I have had that, but it hasn't been, a major theme in my research journey. But it has, working at Addis Ababa University's Kilo campus, FB campus, we're not very far away from the parliament, and I think about the parliament often. Usually when I see the building, and I ask I think Siri maybe childlike questions like, I wonder who there represents me. I wonder what they know of their constituency, what they know of me. And I don't think it's very difficult to find the name of the representative really for someone that's looking, but that was not really what I was looking for. I think I was just asking it as an overarching question about really interested in the relationship between state and society and political institutions. So that's where it came from. And I had an idea that we could do something to connect people with parliamentarians who are people who are curious like me. So I had that idea at the back of my head. I didn't really do a lot about in terms of research, but I had that, and the opportunity at some point presented itself, so I pursued it.
Yeah,
that's how it started.
So you were just telling me earlier on how you developed a communication tool and kind of bridged people meaning students with the parliament. Could you tell us a little bit about that initiative also?
Okay, great. You used the word bridged. So the name of our project was Bridge.
Oh, okay.
It is an acronym for Bridging Research and Innovation for Democratic Governance and Enhanced Participation. So it is called Bridge for Participation. It's so like I told you, I had that idea at the back of my head, but I didn't really know who would fund it, how to get to do it. But I came across this funding opportunity by deepening democracy parliaments for people, which was initiated by Professor Emma Kruer from SOAS. And I think the scheme of the project was to provide small grants to African and Asia-based researchers. And once I read the call, I realized that, that year that I had, maybe this is how it would be funded. So I applied to it. And it encouraged partnership with creatives, which was great. So I partnered with very young, vibrant young people who were interested in developing digital tools and, working on documentaries. So we developed a project where we had a website. We developed this website, and parliamentarians and university students from my university, Addis Ababa University, would interact on that website. And a team of creatives would document that process through documentary making. So they would take time to interview people who were participating online. So we looked at the content online, but we also periodically convened meetings to talk to the parliamentarians and the students face to face to see how they were experiencing the platform. This is how it was initiated. So this was an experiment. We called it an experiment. At a later time, the same project I meant by Professor Emma Kruer provided us with a second round of funding that allowed us to develop an actual tool, an actual application for the parliament in partnership with the House of People's Representatives.
Wow, fantastic. So then how, before, again discussing about the book and its argument, could you also tell me a little bit about how it transit from this tool, which is developed, into a research inquiry, into research design, and then we slowly will go into the main dish of the book.
Great. So all of this that I mentioned, what I was narrating, I think is part of the research, right? So research is, as in a different research project, we try to define research for people who are not academics. And and the way we define it is finding out something. So research is finding out something. It is something that all of us do on a day-to-day basis. So children are great at it. They find out things. And, as we grow, we learn to package those findings to different audiences. So I was finding out things about the parliament through this process. I didn't really realize that. I didn't realize that it was a research process, There was a segment of that that tool development that I called research, which was the part where I sat down with a parliamentarian and interviewed them. But the entire process was a research process. So how it came about is, the book came about is I promised to publish an article to the grant makers. And as I told you, it was an experiment, but it was not a properly designed experiment. So as I wrote what had happened, the process, and tried to package it for a journal, it wasn't an easy task. I was rejected multiple times because one of the things was that I was calling it an experiment, but it was not designed, as I have said, like a proper experiment. So I was continuously rejected. So I wasn't really sure how to put it into, which academic audience to sell it to. So I had written different things about that process, and I had put it aside. And then I was also offered an opportunity by one institution to conduct a research for them, a survey-based research for them on parliament. That was another great opportunity. That came because of the application. So in this one, I had a team of researchers work with me. We conducted research, mainly public opinion data on the parliament. We collected public opinion data in Oromia, Amara region, Afar, and SNNPR at the time. So I had a lot of data at hand. I developed a report. But it was mainly, descriptive kind of work, descriptive statistics instead of actual, nothing sophisticated. So we developed this report, very short timeline, submitted that report to the institution and to the House of People's Representatives who were also interested in the finding. So I had a lot of data. I had a lot of information that I was writing down, but was not publishing at the time. And it was through this process that I thought, maybe I can put everything together and make it into a book. Yeah. So the first people that I had to contact were partners, colleagues, institutions involved throughout. So this includes P4P colleagues. This includes the institution that commissioned the research, and colleagues that participated in the research. Do you mind if I package all of this and write a book? Yeah. So that's
and they
how.
were willing, and
Yes. Yeah. It took some convincing.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and not everyone took it the same in the same way, but I know that there was a lot of encouragement from P4P particularly. I had never written a book proposal before. That was the first book proposal I had written. So I needed some guidance. I needed mentorship, and they happily provided it.
I think that was a fantastic opportunity for you to go through that and to have them on board earlier on, and to just walk through the process to make it a more convincing product, which is the book now. So, which we are very glad also. I mean, I read it and finished reading it yesterday, and I must say I'm very much impressed by the both empirical and conceptual discussions that it offers, and the broader theoretical claim or plea that it signposts to. So could you tell me also about the actual designing now? Okay, we are getting into the book. We have the book proposal, and you have a lot of material on your hand. And then how do you systematize it into packaging it into before the writing? All of that data. Did you need more data? So how does that research design phase from the perspective of those data that you have at your hand, but also evolving to make it more? A little bit of that process, particularly because you have a multidisciplinary approach. So if you can walk us through your timeline into fleshing it out.
So, in terms of the methods of data collection, the methodology overall, you can see that so many different approaches were put together. So there was the survey data, which is quantitative data. There was observation of the online discussions between students and parliamentarians, and then there was my own experience where I, starting from going to the parliament, seeking participation from parliamentarians. So that by itself, then I did not, but now I view it as, something really important. My own experience was captured in the book. At least the learning from that experience is captured. And then the relationship, the interpersonal relationship that over time was developed with parliamentarians. That was really important. So it's not the very formal interviews, focus group discussions. Those are really important too, but also the interactions, outside of the university, outside of the parliament, some interactions in their homes, for example, or in my home, in other settings outside of this formal research or parliamentary affairs setting. So all of that is really important in shaping my understanding of the parliament, and I think is captured in the book in different places. Maybe not, phrased this way, but it's there. Then the life of the parliamentarians, their socioeconomic status, the way they experience life. For example, child raising in Addis Ababa, the way they experience issues of housing and sanitation and transport in Addis Ababa. So not just their work as a representative in meetings, but their life, their day-to-day life, their day-to-day interactions in the city. So all of that is captured. So the data came from all of this, besides the conventional qualitative and quantitative data that was collected. The online, did I miss anything? And then if at the end, I think most of what I had to do at the end was archival work, which was not something that I had a training in, I confess, but I did I had to do some archival work to fill in some gaps that I had, because I wanted to make sure that the book had, it was an analysis of the parliament as it currently is, but I wanted to give it a proper foundation, you know, to see where it came from, how it evolved. So to do that, I had to, read books already published, wonderful books out there, but also do some archival work, little archival work. Yeah.
No, I think that part I really enjoyed a lot, the historical, me being a historian myself, social history, but still not because of my discipline, but mostly because the book has a very deep historical grounding, which enabled me to read it with unfoldings of time, with chronology, and to also see evolve from one era to the other, what changes, what continues. That was very much well documented, and I think you should congratulate yourself for using the archival, but also the historical lens to the story of the parliament that you have brought in. So before we get into again our discussion more about the findings, do you remember any reactions that were particular from the student side, from the parliamentarian side? So how does the triangle between you, the researcher, the students, and exactly how does walk us through a little bit in the inner feelings or reactions or responses of parliamentarians, students, and also the ones who commissioned the research, and yourself, particularly of the parliamentarians. Were they curious? Were they happy? Were they, in a much more nuanced way, if you have any stories to share with us? Or a feeling of their feelings.
Yeah, okay. I can't share my own feelings.
Yes.
It was, okay, so, the discussions were really different types. Some were really serious, content heavy, like asking really serious, substantial questions from students, and then parliamentarians also posting on the website about certain political developments or campaigns that they were having at the time, political messaging. Basically what you would find on mainstream media, you would also find on the website. In other, and then there was less serious, chatty kind of interaction as well, where students, especially coming from students, where they would post, satirical pictures or, memes and things like that. So it was really varied. But what I remember, one incident that I remember, I don't know if it's that significant, because the students and the parliamentarians did not meet face to face throughout the process. They only met at the end. So it was the last day where we were, closing the project. We allowed them to meet face to face. So on that day, I remember we had an incident, not really between parliamentarian and students, but mainly between me and other colleagues from, other fields, like the creatives and app developers, website developers, where we disagreed about our time management through the project. So the way parliamentarians viewed their time, and the way the students viewed their time, the way I did, and the way the person that was directing the documentary was completely different. And we had this built up, we didn't really communicate it throughout the project, but at the end, on the last day, it all came out, and we learned that we weren't very happy with each other, with each other's approach. So there were interesting encounters, substantially, but also through the process,
Yes.
I don't know if this is interesting.
No, I think that's what parliaments do anyway, negotiate different, compromised outcomes out of different views of resources or whatever.
Yeah.
So probably you did your own parliamentary.
Yeah, and it seems like they have, a set way of using time, right? In parliament, it's the way of using time is very structured. And the way I see it, or the way other people in the project viewed it, was completely different. Yeah.
So now diving into the book, Parliament in Ethiopia, Participation, Representation and Resistance. So I read the book and I have so many ideas, but I wanted with viewers to experience using your own voice. You've written the book and there is your voice in 200 and plus pages, but also how would you tell us the major empirical findings of the book and the story of the parliament in Ethiopia from Dr. Mercy Fekadu.
Thank you, Nazan. Okay. Yeah, so you can imagine it's not an easy task to summarize all that. But I will just say, we can look at the parliament from different perspectives. I am not an insider, right? So I am sure if a parliamentarian writes their own story, writes about the parliament, it will be a different one. So I am not an insider. I am not a parliamentarian. I'm not in the secretariat, and I don't work with the parliament either. I mean, on a day-to-day basis. At least I don't have day-to-day activities that force me to interact with the parliament. I can think of myself as part of the citizenry, right? A member of the citizenry. I can think of myself as an academic. And so different people can view the parliament from different ways. So what I tried to do in the book is to give it 3 different views at least. So that is one where the parliament is viewed by the citizens. And I call this the view from below. What do people think about parliamentarians? So this might be, empirically speaking, it might be accurate. For example, the age, the educational level, the gender composition, the political party agenda, all of those things can be accurate. They might not be. But how do people view the parliament? So that is the view from below. And then I thought of a view from above, which is usually the African executive is referred to as an overdeveloped one, too strong, right? So something that's above everything. So I called that the view from below. How does someone from the executive view the parliamentarian? So here it's a tricky question because people in the executive can also be in the parliament, but I am specifically thinking about the parliamentarian that is not in the executive. So that is the focus of my book. Particularly when I talk about the parliament in the current time, I'm talking about the parliamentarian that's not in the executive, that's full-time there, full-time representing people. So how is the parliament? So this mainly focuses on the oversight interaction, the accountability, interaction. And then how do parliamentarians view themselves? So this section I call the introspection. And I think to me it's the most interesting one, where it's not really a section. It came, all these 3 stories of view from above, below, and the introspection cut through all of the chapters. There is no section dedicated to either, to any of these. But I think, to me, it can be summarized as this. Then, what do parliamentarians feel? Knowing what citizens feel about them, knowing what they experience on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, with their socioeconomic status. With their struggles to convince the executive on certain agenda, with their task as legislators, how do they feel about themselves? So it's not, so I think I can summarize it this way, and it's different stories. The parliament is not, parliamentarians are not all the same. There are different types of parliamentarians. And their experience is defined by all of those, differentiating factors.
So to just also to tease 2 points probably to get to hear your views is, I think one of the major arguments of the book is that it offers a nuanced story of a parliament. Or of a parliament in global sense. So could you say a little?
Exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. So when we think of the parliament in Africa, particularly, we think of it as one, we can think of it as something that's not a priority.
Mhm.
You know,
Mm.
there is so much going on in our continent.
Mm.
It's too many priorities. What do we focus on?
Mm.
And we find literature and people of that opinion that the parliament is not a priority. And then you can also find those that say the parliament is a priority, but it can't work because it's an imported concept. You know, parliamentary democracy is not an African thing, so it will not really work here. And this is not Africans saying that about themselves only. You will find European writers saying that about Ethiopia, saying that the parliament or parliamentary democracy will never work in Ethiopia. And then you will also find the view that, well, it's necessary, you know, they want, Africans want it, it's not necessarily imported, there are different kinds of representative institutions, but it's not working. So to totally dismiss it because it's not working. So my view is that, yes, we can say all of these things about the parliament, but we shouldn't stop there, you know, we shouldn't dismiss it. Well, okay, so we shouldn't dismiss something because, one, I think, to begin with, fundamentally, the way we look at the parliament shouldn't only be evaluating it. Yes. You know, to say, what, you know, having a functionalist perspective towards it. So we can have a checklist and say, check, have they done this? Check, have they done that? You know, have they done this? So we can have a list of things that we want them to deliver. But that will not really give us a comprehensive view of what the parliament is. So what I write in the book is I say, let's not just focus on what the parliament does. Let's focus on what the parliament is. So let's look at it, you know, let's look at the parliamentarian. So you can think of a parliamentarian, you know, man, a woman coming from a certain locality, representing constituency, coming to Addis Ababa, traveling, you know, kilometers, 1,000, 2,000 kilometers, moving their life here, and then starting to represent that constituency. What does that mean? You know, how do I understand this person? Do I just say, you know, this person has, you know, what they've voted for, how they, you know, the popular view, that how they have never spoken against the executive, or how they have never spoken against the legislation that was proposed by the executive. This might be true, but there is more to this person. There is more to this institution. There is more to these relationships than just that. So that's I think that is the view that this book offers. It gives an opportunity for people to understand the parliament, not just what it does, but what it is. You know, the Ethiopian parliament. By understanding the Ethiopian parliament, you understand Ethiopia. That's how I opened the book, right? The Ethiopian parliament is an Ethiopian one. It's, even if, let's say, the concept is imported, we didn't import the parliament. We might have imported the concept, but not the parliament. The parliament is authentically Ethiopian. You know, the way it's functioning, the way it is, it is authentically Ethiopian.
Its faces, its names, its time.
How people in the parliament relate with each other, how they talk to one another, the words they use, you know, the interactions they have with authority, decision making, speaking, silencing, all of those things are part of our own culture. So it is authentically Ethiopian.
Exactly. So I think we came to a very good note to my second point, which is I like this statement you make, I think in the introduction, state make parliaments and parliaments make state. So can you give us a little bit discussion about how state make parliaments and parliament make states, what you mean by that actually, which very much resonates to what you've said.
Yeah. Sorry. In the abstract, so sorry. Okay. In the summary, in the abstract of the book, I have put an example. So I can just give you an example of one period, which is, you know, the very first parliament in 1931, which is in the abstract. So you can see there that the parliament was a very necessary institution at the time. The government had to show its legitimacy, not just in the eyes of the Ethiopian people, but mainly in the international community. So this was not just about legitimacy within, it was about sovereignty.
Yes.
So, it was much more than, internal politics. It was about sovereignty. It was about So it was the making of the state.
Exactly.
Part of the making of the state. And then as we see it, why was it there? It was there for legitimacy. It was there for that. But then it was also there to provide a space for the, parts of the monarchy that was retiring. It's there explicitly where the emperor needed to provide positions. The emperor needed to create space for some people to feel important in a system where they were being outdated. So they were being pushed out of the real, real politics, but they still needed to be in the inside. So it was a place of retirement. It was a place of, it was a really important place establishing legitimacy, important space establishing sovereignty. So you can see everything intersecting here. So this is just an example of one period. So the as we look at these parliaments through different periods, we understand the Ethiopian state. We understand the government, yes, but we also understand the state, the making of the state, what it looks like at the time. Yeah, so that is what I invited.
Fantastic. I think that's a beautiful answer. Also, so now going to your own intervention, theoretical intervention about the book. So you say around, I think by the conclusion, the quest for theorizing about the Ethiopian parliament. Could you also say a little bit about that quest and your own theoretical intervention in that section?
Okay. So many things come together, as we look at the parliament as it looks at itself, the introspection. When we look at it from the outside, from the bottom and from the top, so we have all of these things coming together. And I'm sure there is so much yet to be theorized. And I hope that this book will inspire, and this podcast will inspire more people to study the parliament and do substantial theorization. In my part, I focused on, I think, just two things. There are other things that are underlying there, but I can only talk about the two. So one is the issue of accountability, legitimacy, and transparency. So as we see this, we understand that the people demand this from the parliament. We want the parliament to be transparent. We want it to be accountable to us, the person that we have elected. And we know that, we legitimize that through the process of election.
Exactly.
So there's that. And then similarly, we see that the parliamentarians demand the same from the executive.
Exactly.
The parliamentarians seek the executive to be transparent and to be accountable and to be legitimate through the process of accountability to the parliament. And then we also see the reverse where, the executive itself places its own demand on the parliament. So we only think of usually when we think of state society or government, let me put it this way, government society relationship, we think of how we interact with the everyday government, that is the police, that is the person that we meet in the Kabali, in the Warada, all of these in the local government, these are important. These are the executive. But, whatever pressure that we feel from between this relationship, between the executive and the people, actually that relationship and that tension is reflected in the relationship between the parliament and the executive itself. Because the parliament is there representing the people, right? In its through election, but also really being the closest to power. So there is a way we view power. So the way a civilian, a normal and everyday person views power is the same as a parliamentarian views power. But for the parliamentarian, it's much more closer and it's bigger, and the intensity of interaction is higher.
The stakes are higher.
Yeah, the stakes are higher. Exactly. So that is one of there is some theorization done on the book around this. Yeah. Maybe another theorization, I think another leg of discussion that's in the book is on governance. Good governance particularly. Yes. So when we think of good governance, we know all of them, right? 7 of them, 9 of them, they're everywhere. We see them posted in government offices, particularly executive offices. We go to offices and we see them listed on the entrance. So we know about, accountability, transparency, efficiency, effectiveness, and things like that. So these are the 4 that I want to focus on. That usually states like Ethiopia, they tend to focus on deliverables. So they tend to focus on the efficiency. They tend to focus on the effectiveness. So whenever, you ask a certain body why it has done something or how it has done something, the answer, a decision-making body. So I'm talking about decision-making body. The answer would be what, the result of that decision is.
Exactly.
So because it has delivered development, because it has delivered food, health, all of these things. So this is the output, an output-oriented view of good governance, focusing on what the government delivers. But we lack the emphasis on the input, which is the participation and the representation aspect. So it's usually not a discussion about the process. And participation is not something that happens at one point. It's a process. So, when we think about the interaction between people, the citizenry, and the government, which is the executive, that's who I call the government, so the government and the people, usually the discussion is on these things. I'm delivering roads, I'm delivering health, I'm delivering education. This is what I'm delivering. That's excellent. But how? What is the input side of it? Are people participating? So what is the input side? What input have you taken from, these consultations, processes that take place with people? So the input part side of it is usually ignored, and you don't find it often in political discourse. The input side. Usually it's the output side that's there in political discourse in Ethiopia. So I also try to emphasize this. It's a bit prescriptive, the way I've written this section, but I think it's an important one to have, to emphasize processes, not just ends. Yes. We have to think about processes.
So we are towards the end of our conversation around your book, Ethiopia in Parliament and the Ethiopian Parliament. So my last cluster of questions is basically, can you tell us, for example, 2 major takeaways from this research about representative democracy? And attached to that, if you could also tell me, were there materials that have gone beyond the book? And do you plan to do further research? And from the policy side, are there any insight that you are following up from beyond the research and the publication, which is the book? Are there any policy angle practices or tools that you're planning to embark on?
Okay. Let me begin from the first
one.
To
takeaways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me. Let me just emphasize what I said last about participation.
Exactly.
About the inputs part. Side of good governance. I want to emphasize that because unless we care about processes, unless we care about inputs, we will not care about the parliament.
Exactly.
What happens if the government on its own is able to deliver all material things that we seek?
Exactly.
Then we will have no use for the parliament.
Exactly.
But it's not just about what happens, what is delivered. It's about the process. It's about my say in what I receive, right? What citizens say in what is done for them. So once we understand the value of process, the value of participation, then we will start caring for the parliament and empowering it.
Exactly.
And yes, I would like to see a very strong, vibrant parliament in Ethiopia. And I am sure it is already doing so much, but it's not as visible as other institutions. So I would like to see that. So this is why I want to emphasize this. The second point maybe would be, so your question was what comes out of the book, the major 2 things that come out of the book. Okay, I think the second one has sort of slipped my mind. So let me move on to the
Probably
policy.
accountability.
Yes, I see accountability as part, as package
of the
input.
Yes, yes.
The accountability, the representation, the transparency. I see all of those as part of the process.
Yes, multi-layered. You call them multi-layered skills, I guess.
Governance.
Yes,
Yes,
yes, yes.
multi-layered governance. Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So what comes out of the book next? What else? What else is there that I have found? I have found so much through this journey that I have not documented in this book. Some of that has to do with the experience of parliamentarians in the executive. So as I've said, the book has focused on parliamentarians that are full-time parliamentarians, just representatives. But there are parliamentarians outside of that, and their experience as representatives has not been captured. Prominent executive institutions are headed by people who are from parliament. Their experience as representatives is not fully captured. I have not even attempted to do that, but I think it's something that someone should look into and might have some material to support that. The other aspect is, as I looked at the history of Ethiopian parliaments, look at 1931, along with the constitutions. I have not covered in the book the history of the Eritrean parliament during the time of the federation. So that is some material that I have not published, included in the book, particularly in relation with the ending of the federation. And the discussion in the parliament during that time is something that is there, but should be documented. I have not done that. I have the material, but I wasn't able to include it in the book, with the word limitations, 100,000 and things like that. And with policy, like I've said, there is so much that we can learn from this book to put out policy recommendations, actionable policy recommendations. Just the one is the parliament should, and not just the parliament, but everyone should do more to popularize the work of the parliament. And part of that is creating civil society organizations that would, observe the parliament, that would analyze the work of the parliament, that will, work closely with the parliament. Exactly. And you find there are many civil society organizations in Ethiopia, but we don't find one dedicated to the parliament. There is one that's under establishment right now, and I am trying to support that process, but I would like to see more civil society organizations like that work with them. Around the world, we find very strong, parliamentary monitoring bodies that work very closely with the parliament, that popularize its work, that support its work with research. And I think that's one thing that we can do to support the parliament. I think it's a policy angle. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such an insightful conversation, but also for doing all the work to produce this book, which I would imagine is not an easy task to go on. So the last question is, where do we find the book? If we want to read it, I was lucky to get it and read it before this podcast. But where do our viewers could find it? And the last question is also, what's your next project in mind, and when and what should we expect from the new project that you have ongoing?
Okay. Thank you, and you can find the book on, Taylor and Francis Routledge website. You can purchase the hard copy there, but it is open source. You can read the soft copy for free. So that's great. And I really thank the institutions that were able to cover the cost to make it open source, accessible to everyone, everywhere. So you can read it for free. Perfect. If you like the soft copy, you can also, the hard copy, you'd have to order it. Okay, next project, some interesting things going on. Some in relation with the parliament. As I've told you, I am supporting the establishment of one civil society that will be working, hopefully, closely with the parliament. So that is an interesting project. But as a matter of research, there are some research projects that are taking place in Lower Omo, which was my very first research, engagement area, actually. So I'm glad to be back there.
Okay, great.
So we have great research projects taking place there, and hopefully we will have some academic outputs from that project. And also working with Professor Emma again, Professor Emma Curry, to develop some materials for training for politicians, parliamentarians. So hopefully this will materialize soon, and it will be, a policy response. Let me say, an action-oriented, an intervention response towards some of the gaps that we've identified in the book. Yeah.
So, thank you. And we wish you well with that, and hopefully we'll meet again when that gets materialized. And thank you so much for your time, for the conversation we have had about the book. And we invite you all to follow up the book and read and comment and review.